Good morning. Happy Friday. This is our ninth Sniblet as we move through the Corona season. Um, I was thinking, Julie and I were talking the other day, is that I don't know if you've noticed this, that the lack of the busyness of our culture, I think, anesthetizes us to feeling, to interacting, to dealing with ourselves. And as a result of this time that we have, no longer are we anesthetized to our feelings and our thoughts. We have a lot more time to think and to interact, and it forces us to sometimes deal with ourselves. Um, Yesterday, we actually got out in the yard. Yesterday was Thursday. We actually got out in the yard and did some cleanup yard work. And then last night, no game. We just watched the recording of This Is Us. So it's Friday, the ninth Sniblet. Here's our love bombardment question. One of my favorite memories with you is blank. One of my favorite memories with you is blank. Great interactive question. As we're thinking about the resurrection season and Jesus, what he went through on the cross, I want to take you to Matthew chapter 26, verses 57 through 68. This is Jesus before the Sanhedrin. And Jesus has been arrested in the garden. He's been beaten. He is taken before Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin make up 23 elders, 23 priests, and 23 scribes. There's 70 in the Sanhedrin. Actually, there were 71 because there were two high priests. There was a high priest named Annas, and Annas was not allowed by the Romans to be the high priest for an indefinite period of time. He could only be the high priest for 1 year. So what Annas did is he would then appoint his sons and son-in-laws to be the puppet high priest. This particular year, Caiaphas, his son-in-law, is the high priest, but Annas is really the controlling high priest. All that that was free of charge. What you're going to see is one of the greatest injustices of all time. There are seven, in verses 57 through 68, we're going to see that there are 7 Hebrew laws that were broken by the Sanhedrin so that they could declare Jesus guilty. I'm going to point them out to you. Here was the first one, starting in verse 57. Jesus has just been arrested. It's the middle of the night. And those who had seized Jesus led him away to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were gathered together. Here's the first Hebrew law that's broken. The Hebrews, according to their Sanhedrin laws, had to put somebody on trial so the public had access to him. Well, they're meeting in the middle of the night. Where's the public? Well, the public's not there because they're in bed in the middle of the night. So they break their first Hebrew law. They don't meet in public, they meet in private. Private meetings are kind of dangerous. So here's the second law that was broken, verse 59. Now the chief priests and the whole council kept trying to obtain false testimony against Jesus in order that they might put him to death. Here, the Sanhedrin were supposed to be defense attorneys. And they were supposed to defend the person that was on trial. And by trying to find accusations against Jesus, they break their own law. That's the second law that's broken. The third there that's found is 2 eyewitnesses had to be in perfect agreement. Well, they're looking for 2 false testimonies. So they break their third rule. We go down to verse 62 to see the fourth rule that's broken. And the high priest stood up and said, "Do you make no answer? What is it that these men are testifying against you?" Well, the fourth rule they make is that the high priest is not supposed to bring accusations. He wasn't supposed to demand a response. The person on trial, according to their rules, could remain silent the whole time. So by the high priest saying, "You, Jesus, come on, tell us," Well, they're forcing him, or they're trying to force him to talk, which is breaking their own rule. In verse 63, it says, when Jesus kept silent. Do you ever wonder why Jesus kept silent? Well, the reason Jesus kept silent before the Sanhedrin was that he was holding them to their own rules. According to their rules, he, being on trial, didn't have to talk. The Sanhedrin were their defense attorneys. So by the high priest accusing Jesus and demanding him respond, well, that's the fourth law that's broken. Then we skip down to verse 65. And the high priest tore his robe, saying, he has blasphemed. What further need do we have of witnesses? Jesus has just said, yeah, I'm the Son of God. And the high priest says, behold, you have now heard the blasphemy. Well, he asked the question, what further need do you have of witnesses? Well, again, he breaks the rule. You've got to have two witnesses, at least two witnesses in total agreement. So by throwing out the need for witnesses, well, you're breaking your own rule. When he says, what need do we have of witnesses? Well, your rules call for a need of witnesses. And then in verse 66, what do you think? Well, and the Sanhedrin answered and said, he is deserving of death. This group of men that is supposed to be the defender of those who are being accused, all of them unanimously declare him guilty. Now here's the rule. According to their laws, if somebody didn't speak up and speak contrasting to the majority vote, then the whole thing would have been thrown out. A unanimous vote by the Sanhedrin was thrown out because it meant that somebody wasn't thinking critically. So again, by a unanimous vote, well, somebody's not thinking critically. They then are not holding to one of their laws. So the sixth law is broken. Then the seventh law. Then get this in verse 67. Then they spat in his face and beat him with their fists, and others slapped him. And they said, prophesy to us, you Christ, who is the one who hit you? The Sanhedrin were not allowed to touch the person on trial. And here they are, spitting at him and slapping him and beating him. The defenders of the innocent turn into an angry mob, and they turn into a lynch mob. 7 Hebrew laws are broken. They meet in secret. They throw out the idea of having 2 witnesses. They are accusers and not the defenders. They demand a response when he's supposed to be allowed to be silent. They throw out the need for witnesses again. A unanimous vote would have disqualified their judgment, and they were not allowed to touch him, and they became the angry mob that beat him. They were on a mission. They would rather kill God than give up their lifestyle of religious sin. You know, what comes to my mind is, what do the events around the trial say about Jesus' mission to pay the penalty for our sins? That's why he came. He came to die. Now, I think it's easy for us to look at this and go, man, that's not fair. This is a travesty of justice. And everything in us is incensed by the lack of fairness. And, I think Jesus went through an unjust trial so that you and I wouldn't have to go through a just one. Because what is fair is that you and I would go through a trial and we would all be declared guilty. That would be fair. So Jesus went through an unjust trial so you and I wouldn't have to go through a just one. But this trial in and of itself, you ought to be incensed. It's embarrassing. You know, what's more alarming than this trial that's a travesty is that after this joke of a trial that mankind, actually went through with killing the God of the universe on the cross. And what's more unjust than what this farce of a trial is that Jesus died in my place. That is more unjust than this trial where he's falsely accused. Jesus died for me on the cross. That's unjust. So here's the question. How does Jesus' willingness to die for each of us cause us to respond? or how should it cause us to respond? A great discussion question for you and your family. How should we respond? Francis Schaeffer said this way: how shall we then live as a result of this? So, great question. How does Jesus' willingness to die for each of us, well, how should that cause us to respond in light of all these injustices that he went through? Great discussion. Have a great weekend. We will see you Sunday. Again, tune in 9 o'clock on Sunday morning or therefore after. We will be talking once again about communication and conflict in the context of family. I think it'll be very practical. So we'll see you on Sunday morning.